The GFL has officially been announced, and their goal is to compete with the UFC. I got the scoop, so settle in, grab a beverage of your choice, and let's figure out if that's feasible. Like every other MMA organization, the point of the GFL is to compete with the UFC. How are they going to do this? Other organizations have tried turning MMA into a sport. They've tried freak shows, 2-on-2 fights, large weight disparities between opponents, just signing ex-UFC names, right? These are all somewhat feasible strategies, but they haven't really broke the mold. So what is the GFL's gimmick? They got teams. As of right now, there is 300 fighters selected for the draft. 120 total fighters get drafted into 6 teams of 20. There's 10 weight classes, with each team getting 2 people per weight class, and all weight classes are up 10 pounds because they're trying to eliminate extreme weight cutting. The team element is supposedly going to add new stories that can be told. Can these fighters coexist on a team? Stuff like that. It's also based on the idea that people love to cheer for teams. If MMA has teams, they'll love to cheer for them too. Right now, it looks like most, if not all of the teams are going to be based out of the United States. Maybe they'll get one in Canada, but events are going to take place all over the world. They're looking to do events in Saudi Arabia, Stockholm, Japan, Sao Paulo, and all over the US. And the other point of the league is to be more friendly towards fighters. 50% of all revenue goes back into fighter pay, 8% goes to fighter retirement, 2% goes to insurance. There's less exclusivity deals. The UFC was notorious for locking people down and forcing them to fight out their contracts, or basically just retire. Different GFL fighters have different contracts, but Anthony Pettis and Kevin Lee both talked about how they can go box, compete in grappling tournaments, karate combat, stuff like that. So that's very interesting. So who's the boss, and where's all this money coming from? Darren Owen was part of the founding of the World Series of Fighting and eventually helped run the PFL until 2020. He's basically going to be the GFL's Dana White. Promoter, matchmaker, figurehead. Those are the kinds of hats he's going to wear. Most of the money is coming from Aaron Parimi, tech guy, does consulting work, bunch of companies. He's also an AI tech bro. These are the main 2 figureheads, but there's also a whole host of other Silicon Valley tech bros and private equity firms, which is a bit concerning. Parimi is also the founder of Combat Plus, the streaming home of the GFL. Woo! Another streaming service. Let's go. That's what they're going to use to stream their fights if they don't get a deal with a pre-existing service. They've been shopping around. I'm so excited for GFL on Pluto TV, GFL on Tubi, GFL on the Food Network. Any of those would be great. The first season is coming in April 2025, and it's basically a proof of concept season. Going to see what works, going to see what doesn't work. To start, the league is going to own all the teams, and then after the first season, they're going to open it up and have other people bid and try to invest in and own these other teams, try and gain more funding that way. Because according to Mr. Owen, no one wanted to be the first one to invest in this, so they're all going to wait until the end of the first season, and then probably all jump in at the same time. Most organizations live and die by the talent they have, so who's involved in this? Oh, anyone who's been kicked out of the UFC in the last 5 to 10 years? They got invited? Okay. Ironically, they have more UFC heavyweight champions than the UFC right now. Just taking a quick peek here. At heavyweight, they have Alan Belcher, ex-UFC fighter, Alexei Olenek, ex-UFC fighter, Andrei Arlovsky, Fabricio Verdum, Frank Mir is coming out of retirement, Junior Dos Santos, Robelis de Spain, former UFC heavyweight and light heavyweight Tanner Boser, Alexander Gustafsson is making his long-awaited return after getting cut from the UFC. Got knocked out by Nikita Krylov. We thought he was going to retire. Nope, here he is. He's going to make a fat paycheck. Good for him. Gegard Mousasi got let go of his PFL contract because they weren't giving him fights, like Patchy Mix, Corey Anderson, and Patricio Pitbull. So he ended up here. Headbutt specialist Kyle Dawkins, male model Luke Rockhold, no chin Phil Hawes, and a little bit concerning, Vanderlei Silva, who 2 years ago already said that he was riddled with CTE. Oh, this isn't going to end well. Abubakar Nurmagomedov, he is one of Khabib's cousins. He fought in the UFC, 2-2. He's okay, I guess. Benson Henderson is returning. Francisco Trinaldo was in the UFC. He's here. He's an old guy. Tyron Woodley is returning, fresh off of getting KO'd by Jake Paul. Not even fresh. That was years ago already. Time flies when you're getting knocked out. former UFC lightweight champion Anthony Pettis. Jeremy Stevens, the hardest hitting 145er, is fighting at lightweight, which, for reasons we'll get into later, is 165 pounds here. UFC alum John Makdessi. Where does Kevin Lee fit into this? We found him. He fits in right here in the GFL. C-plus player Will Brooks is here. We got Marlon Moraes, because he just doesn't want to be able to walk at 50. And at bantamweight, we have Jimmy Rivera. Where has he been for the last couple of years? And finally, Henan Barao. The women's names aren't great either. They have a couple ex-UFC fighters. They have Tanya Evinger. I thought she was retired. I think she's older than Holly Holm. And they also have Pani Kianzad. I don't know how to pronounce her name. I didn't even know she was in the UFC until I looked at her render and the GFL for their website. They didn't get new renders for all the people. Some people, they just have their UFC renders, but their arms are conveniently crossed, so it blocks out the UFC logo and everything's cropped correctly. It's kind of funny. But the women's fighters are not great. They have like 10 of them so far, and they're all pretty bad. So those are the fighters that might be a little bit beloved. You can cash in on some name value there. And people will tune in. For Gus fighting, I'll tune in. But they also have some bad apples. Husamar Palhares, the guy known for destroying people's knees, is fighting a bunch of old guys who already can't walk. That's great. For those who aren't in the know, Palhares has a reputation for holding on to submissions way too long. 3 seconds, 4 seconds after a tap, and it's always a knee bar, and it's always disgusting. Very dirty fighter, one of the dirtiest fighters in the sport. The fact that he was kicked out of everywhere else, and then he gets a job here, is not appealing to me. No well wishes for that guy. Woman beater Greg Hardy is here. No word on whether or not inhalers are going to be legal in this organization, but he better make sure first. He better clear it with the commission, okay? Steroid cheat Hector Lombard is here. Woo, yeah, woo. Yeah, any claps for Hector Lombard? He often took his roid rage out on beginners at the gym. Maybe first sparring session of these kids off the street, and he just beat the brakes off them. The inaugural GFL draft is happening on January 24th, 2025. So who would I select as my number one overall draft pick? It's really hard because there's no undefeated guys. Well, there's a couple, but they're all like 3-0, 4-0. They're untested. So I couldn't just pick one. I picked 3 who I believe could win the whole goddamn thing. Alexander Maslov is a Russian prospect. He has 1 loss, and he is a very powerful guy. Great striking, sprawl and brawl, a little bit of a throwback fighter. Tattoos like Jeff Munson, and real good attitude. Gegard Mousasi can still compete at a very high level. His only losses in Bellator were to Johnny Eblen and Fabian Edwards. Those are like top 15 guys, I would say, in the UFC. Johnny Eblen is very good. I rate him very highly. Fabian Edwards, maybe not so much, but he did okay in that fight. And the third and final fighter that I believe can do well in the GFL, Dominic Merriweather. I looked into the guy. He has a decent record, good skill set, young, hungry, and I think he could go far as well. So the final question of the day, what everybody wants to know, can it compete with the UFC or even PFL? No, it never will. Best case scenario is that it influences the UFC, changes some of their policies regarding fighter pay, insurance, retirement bonuses, stuff like that. That's unlikely, but a boy can dream. And really, the GFL just feels like a PFL knockoff. PFL focuses on the bracket as well, but recently they realized that super fights are the way to go. You don't want to waste talent like Francis Ngannou fighting through a bracket to try and get to Henan Ferreira. You just want to do that fight. The UFC figured this out 25 years ago, that they could just make the biggest and best fights without having to put people through brackets and tournaments. There's a couple of fights I really want to see. Gegard Mousasi versus Luke Rockhold. Mousasi was competent at a high level in Bellator, and Luke Rockhold had a very close fight with Paulo Costa at this point in his career, so I feel like that could be a banger. Both very good strikers, good kickers with some underrated grappling. And then I'd also like to see Tyron Woodley versus Benson Henderson. I believe that Benson Henderson had 3 title defenses. By today's standards, he'd already be calling for double champ status. So Tyron Woodley versus Benson Henderson feels like a fight that could have happened a decade ago, and I like both guys, but the odds of it playing out that way are very unlikely. And you just know we're going to get some absolute dog shit matchups too. Anyone up for Junior Dos Santos versus Fabricio Verdum 3? Once in the UFC, once in Game Bred MMA, once in GFL. I am not excited about Vanderlei Silva fighting. Again, I said it earlier, the man has a 49-fight professional career. I do not need to see him get KO'd. Just give him the 2% retirement money. Have him be a coach or a business guy or a spokesperson or anything. I cannot stand him getting knocked out. Please don't let it happen. Rescind his contract. Do anything you have to. I feel like the team system is flawed and people are only trying to ever make it work in MMA, right? The closest thing to MMA is amateur wrestling, and they sort of have teams in a sense, but they're associated with schools. At first, I just thought this was going to be an old man fight league. We're going to let the geriatric guys get paid and fight people their own age instead of young prospects like the people that the UFC would feed them to. But I dug a little deeper, and they just advertised the top 50 most followed names. They are signing, quote unquote, the best up-and-coming fighters as well. They just weren't part of the first wave of names. So all these names that are getting announced, yeah, you can look forward to them getting KO'd in their first fight by some up-and-coming prospect who just wants to make it through the bracket and change their life. I hope that retirement money is enough to let us put you out to pasture, said the GFL, laughing maniacally. Welp, that's the GFL. I personally don't think it's going to get far. It's going to have this season and then maybe 1 or 2 more. It'll close within 5 years. That's my life expectancy on the GFL. Let me know yours in the comments below. I'm dying to know what other people think, because I think this is a good concept, but in practice, I think this is just going to be sad. Like, comment, and subscribe for more MMA content. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a good time.